Good morning to all of my distinguished guests and my dear students. We have with us Sri Sandeep Singh ji. He is a postgraduate in rural development from Xavier's Institute of Social Sciences, Ranchi. He's got a very nice profile, and I take pride in introducing him. He has specialization in media planning from MICA, and general business management is done from IIM Bangalore. Sandeep ji started his professional life with ASSOCHAM, then worked as media planner with RK Swamy BBDO and Hindustan Thompsons and Associates as HTA as media researcher with AC Nielsen and ORG Mark, and is vice president sales and marketing with ETC Network, Sub TV, and Sahara News. Sandeep ji was instrumental in positioning Sub TV as a comedy channel. He was also instrumental in launching Sahara Samay Bihar and Jharkhand and Sahara Samay NCR. He gave up his professional life in 2006. From that day onwards, he has been documenting and promoting the Indian way of management. He is on the advisory board of National Institute of Mass Communication and Journalism in Ahmedabad, and has created, it is very interesting to know that he's created a museum on Indian business history where he conducts a walk through of Indian business history. So, sir, a warm welcome from our side. I also welcome Team Index Studies, Mr. Ram Sharma and Mr. Arjun Singh ji and the entire team. Sandeep Singh sir is going to speak on temple economics. I think it's a very interesting topic because temples, as we know in India, it's always played a very important role. And understanding the economy perspective would be something that we all would be looking forward to. And I welcome you, sir, for this session. We have with us semester one students of MBA who are pursuing MBA, BBA, integrated MBA, and BCom students. And we are also joined by faculty members of Indus Institute of Management Studies. A warm welcome, sir, and I would like you to please take the session ahead.
Thank you, Daisy ma'am. Thank you so much. And before I start, the first disclaimer is that I'm the same person whose picture you might have seen in this JPEGs on your phone. So this is the asset that I've built during Corona period. And so once I've settled that, so I'd like to thank Ram Sharma ji, Center for Index Studies, and Indus University for giving me the opportunity. Good morning, all the students and the faculty members. It's a great pleasure to interact with you all. I'm going to talk about temple economics, which is the topic of my forthcoming book. It's going to be my 11th book. And there are two aspects of the book. One is the subject, the temple economics, and the second is the way I'm going to publish it. So I'm going to talk about both the aspects, and it won't take more than 45 minutes. It will be short, sweet, and crisp. And the first I'm going to talk about temple economics. And I have to keep it simple. I have kept it as a part of 5 questions. When you say temple economics and a book, so I talked to a few friends, had some webinars, and these are the top 5 questions that comes to people's mind. And after that, if anyone has any questions or any thoughts, you can put it, or you can ask me, or you can put it on the chat. I'll be happy to answer them. So first question that comes to mind is that what is temple economics? So I won't get into a long definition, but if I put it as a plain simple definition, it will be an economic activity generated and centered around temple is temple economics. Very simple, So it's important that let's talk about examples. So when you go to a temple, you follow a lot of rituals, like there'll be flowers, there'll be petals, sometimes the leaves, and we often dismiss it saying, they're just rituals, they don't carry much meaning. But in reality, which is not the case. In many temples, what you do is that you offer rice, and there are temples that where you offer a rice of different variety every day. Now you'll be shocked that there was a time in India when we had more than 8 lakh varieties of rice. Generally you will know that rice takes 60 days to 90 days, but we had a variety of rice which could be shown and harvested in 30 days, 40 days, 50 days, and all this were grown, or only those varieties are still left in India which are actually used to offer in the temples. Rest of the varieties have disappeared, and that is true for many flowers or many plants also. If you go around, especially even in the rural part or semi-rural India, you'll find that each temple or each village will have their own what you call. They have different terms where they grow vegetation which are offered to the temple. So our whole ecosystem or natural system has survived due to they have linked to the temple as an offering, as a part of the ritual. And rice is a very one of the prominent example, and there are many work available on the same. So it preserves the natural ecosystem, the rituals. It's just that directly linked. In fact, I like to share with you. We must have seen or heard that in India, when we go to a river, we generally throw coins in the river, and we laugh, or sometimes we follow, depending on at what age or what thought process we follow. But the science behind it is amazing. Earlier days, the coins used to be in the gold, then silver, and then bronze, and then slowly we moved to plastic, and nowadays a paper or aluminium. But if you notice, even the water purifiers today advertise that it has silver in it, which helps purify the water. So the thought behind throwing those coins in the river was that when you have gone to a religious place for a pilgrimage, there must be some pollution caused by you. So when you offered those coins to the river there, basically they used to go down and settle in the bottom of the river, and over a period of time they will degenerate and you keep purifying the water. So it was just a small beautiful thing how to keep your pollution free river or your pilgrimage space, and it was linked to a small ritual. It's just that if we don't understand, we'll laugh at it. So there's a whole thought process behind it. I'll give you another example. Pilgrimage. This is a very important concept in India or in Hindu Dharma. So to give you an example, in 2013, there was a Kumbh in Prayagraj. Associated Chamber of Commerce, that is ASSOCHAM, did a study, and they calculated that UP government made 12,000 crore rupees out of that. In Nasik, there was a 2015 Kumbh, and it generated 10,000 crore of revenue and 4.5 lakh employment opportunity. Now the employment opportunity comes in various forms. People keep people in their guests, offering food, transport, communication, all those kind of things. And in 2019, the last concluded Ardha Kumbh in Prayagraj, the UP government spent 4,200 crore rupees, and the revenue generated out of that was 1.2 lakh crore. So you can imagine the kind of money is there. And it's just that we don't document it, we don't talk about it, so we don't value it, and we happily ridicule it. So that is the reason I said, no, let's document it as a form of a book. And that is one of the reasons to talking to the students of management and economics, so that some of you might take this up as a study or as a project work in a place like nearby. It's not just simple. There are huge impact of dharma on the economy. We follow a new financial year of April to March. How many have you thought that why do we follow April to March? Why not Jan December? In countries around the world, they'll follow Jan December. Some follow June July. But why do we follow March April? And why few other countries follow April to March financial year? The background is very interesting. If you have come through Angus Madison study, you would have realized that till Mughals came, we used to contribute almost 50% of world GDP. Till the British invasion happened, we were contributing 25% of world GDP. So when British came, our New Year all linked to harvest, and they start around harvest festival, that is in April. So they had no choice but to adopt our financial year. And wherever British colonies were there, they were also forced to follow the same financial year. Now I guess Canada has changed, but except that if you follow the Commonwealth countries, most of them will still follow April to March financial year. So that's the huge impact we have. Not only that, if you look in day-to-day conversation, if you deal, you'll realize is that when you're talking about a business, we talk about shubh labh, not labh. It's not only profit. It's an auspicious profit. So आप किसी के खून चूस के पैसे नहीं कमा सकते हैं, and that is not acceptable in our part of the world. या हम जब वजन करते हैं, the weighing scale, it is called dharm kata. Uh, and if you buy a shop from the guy who weighs it or the normal kirana guy, in class it's very interesting exercise when ask people for 15 to 30 minutes, people wonder what they do. Actually, when he balances it and before he puts it in a packet, he does a small thing, he'll put something extra. So when he says the scale is balanced, then also the thought process in India is that though it looks balanced, there still might be some mistake, and let that mistake be from my side, and hence I'll put little more. And if you travel from Kashmir to Kanyakumari, from Mizoram to Gujarat, everywhere you will find this practice. And if you calculate, he might be giving 1 to 2% of every day's production, whatever he is selling, just as a free. And if you compare it to a mall, when you go to a mall, even if you buy potato, you pay up to the 3 decimal places. So if you buy a potato 1 kg, it will never be perfect 1 kg. So if it is 1.003 gram, the calculator will calculate at 0.003 gram also. While you go to buy jewelry in India, it is sold up to only 2 decimal places. After the decimal, only 2 places are taken into calculation, price calculation. So that's the significant part of our business which has been impacted by dharma. And we don't have a word for blackmail in any Indian language. As a concept, it didn't exist. And so that is talking about how dharma has impacted the business in different formats. Now, the second question that comes to mind is, how old is temple economics? Now, this is very interesting. I'll give you, I often use compare and contrast method in my classes, and I'll use here. If you go on Google or internet search engine and type Rust Belt of USA, जंग जो बोलते हैं लोहे में लग जाता है, so you'll find Detroit comes in the picture, and all the suburban cities surrounding Detroit are called today Rust Belt of USA. Now, Detroit was the Motown of the world. Maximum number of cars were produced there. And over a period, it was cheaper to produce a car in Japan, in Korea, in Philippines, in India. So the car production shifted out, and there was nothing else to offer in Detroit. The city closed down, and once the main factories closed down, all the accessories units surrounding Detroit, those factories closed down. So that whole city is called today Rust Belt. People don't stay there; they are ghost towns. In fact, the whole America is trying to revive Detroit. And few years back, Mahindra started a research division in Detroit of all the places. And if you go to most of the manufacturing cities, countries like China, you just type ghost towns in China, you'll find a huge list of towns where nobody stays now. Because those towns, those factories have closed. These productions are cheaper at somewhere else, or there is an alternative source or alternative product which can meet that demand. So people have moved from those cities. So, and these are 100-year, not more than 100-year-old cities. But if you look, which are the oldest cities in the world, which are called living civilization, that is where somebody has lived all through from the thousands of years. The names you will come to mind is Banaras, Pushkar, Ujjain, Rameshwaram, and so on and so forth. And they are called living civilization because there has never been a break. Now, what does it mean? Is that when you look at Egypt's pyramid, now you don't find people who can build similar kind of pyramid. They don't know how it has been built. But in India, we have temples which are built not only at the same time as pyramid was built, but before pyramid was built. And we can build exactly same temples today by the same technology. That is a proof that we are a living civilization. It's the same civilization which has been living on, and that knowledge has been passed from one generation to other. So that's the beauty. And so that is how old the temple economics is. Like Varanasi is called a city older than the history. And they all have survived. And this city is, as I took the name, Pushkar, Ujjain, Varanasi, Rameshwaram, they're not industrial towns. They're all dharmic places. And that is why they've survived for so long. They have their own economy. And it's just that it's not that, as I said, there's always a thought behind it. So if you look in the rainy season, we had a lot of pilgrimage or festivals, which are Rath Yatra, Kawad, where people walk down carrying water on the Shiv temple. Then there is Wari in Maharashtra, where you walk to Pandharpur. There are four, but most popular one is Ashadi. So you will realize that all of them are in rainy season, where other activities are not very high, agriculture activity or other activity. So it has been planned in a very nice way. So, and then if you look that we had, if you go to different religious places, we had different Koshi parikramas. Like if you go to Banaras, we have Panch Koshi parikrama, Das Koshi parikrama. Vrindavan, if you go, there are 12 Koshi parikrama. So what happens is that during this time, the whole people, when you move from this place to that place, the economy moves. And in the end, we have, like if you take example of Kawad Yatra, where people carry water and walk to the Shiv temple. And huge number of people go to Haridwar. So there's a study, they concluded 60 lakh people moved carrying Kawad, and on average they spent 300 rupees because you walk down. They are very simple rituals. You don't have a choice to spend high amount of money. So in an average in 20 days, 60 lakh people into 300 rupees, 180 crore rupees spent. So it is equal distribution of wealth among the downtrodden people. If you set up a government machinery to distribute 180 crore, 80 to 100 crore will go in administrative expenses, salary, transportation, and all those. And so such was a beautiful system which was planned. And every 4 years there is a Kumbh. So people all around the India move, and along with them the economy moves. So it works as a redistribution of wealth. So that is how it was beautifully planned. So if you look at the history, how old is the temple economics? As far as you can remember, the temple existed right from the time when in early 800 BC, where Raja Dahir was attacked in Sindh. Before that time, temples have been source of economy, and that is one of the reason why our temples have always been attacked by the invaders. Apart from being religious fanaticism. So now the next question comes: how we lost our temple economics? Now this is very interesting and troublesome journey. So there was been, as I mentioned just now, that first attack started somewhere 800 BC on Raja Dahir, and from there it has been a constant attack on our temple. So temple were desecrated, so people don't go to pray after that. They damaged the murtis there, so people will not go to offer prayer because you don't offer prayer to a damaged murti. Many times people realize that invaders are going to attack and they are going to destroy the murti in the temple. So they started hiding it. Jagannath temple in Puri was attacked, invaded by 17 times by Mughal invaders. And for 17 times they couldn't break that idol there. They kept the pandas whom normally people abuse many times for, they gave up their life and they used to run away with the idol and hide it. So that there was a puja stopped for in between 150 years for the Mughal and Muslim period. The puja couldn't happen regularly, but the temple idol was never allowed to be broken. But that there was a break in the worship in between. After that, people realizes that since they stay near the temple, the invaders come and they know where the temples are and they attack them. So they started living at a distance from the temples. So one of the reason why Kailash temple was said that British discovered it. It's not that they discovered it. Somebody built the temple, so it was already there. It was like saying India was discovered. India was already there. There was nothing to be discovered. We are older than most of the civilization. So the temples, people left it. People left it to grow forest so that the invaders will not attack it. Now here is the time where we need to stop and ponder and think, what all sacrifices our forefathers have made to preserve these temples. And are we really valuing them? Are we taking care of them? Now that is something which we need to keep thinking constantly. Then comes the Mughal rule, and after that also it was British. There used to be kind of jizya tax. If you're building a big temple, they will come and slaughter you. They will tax you heavily. So if you go to North India, you don't find big temples like we will find in rest of India. And in fact, if you go to Delhi, the Birla Mandir was built after 250 years gap. Any big temple was built in north of India. And after Birla temple, Swaminarayan temple was built. So that impact on the psychology of the people residing there was so huge that the Hindus, which are always used to building huge temples, They almost stopped building huge temples, and that is one of the reasons why our economy has always been in ruins, especially in the northern part, if you look. And whichever part, what you call today Afghanistan, Pakistan, they were all huge temples if you go and study history. They were destroyed, and if you look, they kept looting, they took the money away from temples, but they couldn't build anything. And those areas still suffer from the economic standpoint. Now, slowly, even after independence, if you see, the schools were removed from the temples. There's a very interesting part when the British offered modern medical science in India. Already doctors were there. India has been known as a leader in the surgery. Uh, so when the modern medical colleges were being opened, so there were two kind of protests. One was led by a group of Muslims. They insisted that the education should be offered in Urdu. There's another group led by so-called Raja Ram Mohan Roy, who said we should be taught in English and not in Sanskrit. So we started killing the Sanskrit. We took away the schools from the temples, uh, and then slowly one or the other after another, every one thing was chiseled away from the temple. Dance, whether it is a Odissi or a Bharatnatyam, it has a Manipuri. All of them have a origin in temples. The music originated from temples, so which were banned on one or the other pretext, and they were removed from the temples. What we call so-called handicraft, if you look at the Madhubani or any handicraft, they are all linked to one or the other temple in this country. But they were given a name of a handicraft and they were moved away from the temple. The signs. Our temples were sent are huge monuments of architect, and we know that there are temples where pillars produce different kind of music. There are temples when on a particular day from a particular hole sun rays will fall on the murti and the murti will glow. So what it means is a huge architect knowledge, and when we say huge architectural knowledge, it means that you need to understand geometry as well as a trigonometry. If you don't understand geometry and trigonometry, you can't build those kind of buildings. And no wonder India was a leader in maths. And there is something very interesting. The first inscription of zero anywhere in the world is found in a temple in Gwalior. And like World War One and World War Two, if you go into the history of maths, you will find that there is a war One and Maths War Two. So in Europe, which was dominated by clergy and the church, it took them 200 odd years to accept a concept called zero, because they couldn't fathom zero is a huge philosophical concept. If you put it start with zero, it means empty. When you add it at a 10, then there are 9 numbers in it. So whether zero is empty or encompasses everything, it was a huge philosophical debate in West. It took a long time to accept. And a similar thing when integral calculus was invented in Kerala. Yeah. So it is integral calculus is calculation of 0 to infinity. Again, the West couldn't conceive it, and another 200 odd years it took them to accept. So this is two things are called Maths War One and Maths War Two. While in India, all this maths originated in our temple. And the temples were a center for judiciary as well. In fact, even if you look today in various parts in Gujarat, the panchayat meets in the temple, because then nobody will lie and the panch will also do a proper justice. So that was the importance of temple. Temple were center for irrigation also. So all land which were not cultivable were brought under the temples, and it was temples' responsibility to see to it that they are irrigated properly. And once they were worth cultivating, they were handed over to the people. And if you go in the south, you will find that they are inscribed in the stone. So you can't argue about it. You can't say that it's a fictitious history. So it was all part of it. It just that slowly everything was chiseled away from temple, and we started forgetting about the temple economics. I'll give you another example of science. If some of you have heard of name Praful Chandra Ray, he was a huge scientist. British never allowed him to work properly in their labs. So he never got married. He converted his house into lab, and he spent all his money to get people to do study in science, and he went on to form a company called Bengal Chemicals. He wrote the book called Hindu Chemistry and Rasayan, which is a translation of original Sanskrit text, which is our traditional chemistry knowledge, into an English book called Rasayan. So when he was looking for original script, he went on looking at India in different parts he couldn't find. Finally, he could locate one copy in the Raghunath Mandir of Kashmir. So it was another proof that our temples were center for learning of science and technology as well. Now the next question comes is, can I give some current example of temple economics? Now, Prime Minister Nehru, when he was inaugurating Bhakra Nambal Dam and other public sector units, he used to call them the center modern temples of India. Nothing wrong in it. It's just that, very interestingly, there's another public sector called MMTC, Minerals and Metal Trading Corporation of India, which was getting into losses, and somebody thought of, very maybe in the modern terms, communal thought, that they deal in minerals and metals for government of India and they auction it. They said, "Okay, let's approach Tirupati temple and some other temples where they auction hair. In Tirupati Mandir, you go and you offer your hair, and it is auctioned. And Europe and America are a huge market where they take away this hair to make wig. So they got into a talk with Tirupati temple and they arrived at agreement and they started auctioning hair from Tirupati temple. And Tirupati temple no doubt made more money. Minerals and Metal Trading Corporation (MMTC) came into profit from losses just by auctioning hair. That was a quantity. Today, MMTC has deal with lot of temples and they auction silver and gold which is being offered in the temple. So the modern temples are dependent on original temples even today for their survival. Now, when I mention about the small thing that the gold in the temple and the silver, there's a very interesting part. Some of you might be aware of that in India, when a businessman starts a business, most of them take it as that the god is one of his partner of worth 1% to up to 5%. And once they make profit, it's never documented. He might be paying tax on that, but he takes that 1% to 5%, whatever he has said, God is worth this much of amount in my partnership. So they go and offer it in the temple. So that's why you read that somebody offered so much of money in temple. So they treat God as a partner in their temple. Now coming to the modern thing, if you look at the tourist places, religious places, five-star hotel in an industrial town might go into losses. Room occupancy might be 50 to 60%, but they are in the religious places. Their occupancy rate is never below 90 to 100%. And you can just do internet search; you'll find enough data on that. Look at the movies, look at the songs. Number of them depend on that temple or the songs to make money. And our temple have been keeping their feet, to kadam सात कदम मिला के चलते हैं टेक्नोलॉजी के, as they say. So you can do online darshan too. You can offer all online puja samagris today. So the temples have been surviving and contributing to the Indian economy even now. Now the last part of the question of my 5 questions that I come is that why I am writing a book now. Now something very interesting happened that during Corona, like any other calamity, it always happens that people start asking questions. Let's get the money from temple. Ask temples to give money. The two kind of question comes. So why only temples? Why not other religious places? So there is a difference between religion and dharma, as we say. So why only dharmic places? Maybe others can't contribute. They don't have faith, or people don't give money there. I don't know. But very interestingly, that is the first thought comes to people, and they have somewhere that confidence also that will give. So how much uh, money people contributed? It's very interesting. I just did a small collection of calculation. During Corona, kind of money given by temples. Kanchi Mutt 20 lakhs, Mahavir Mandir Trust 1 crore, Mata Vaishnav Mandir, Mahamaya Mandal 6 lakhs, Somnath Mandir 1 crore, Ambuja Mandir 1 crore, Sai Baba Trust 51 crore, Devasthanam Management Committee Kolhapur 2 crore, Baba Ramdev 25 crore, Swaminarayan Temple 2 crore, Mata Vaishnav Devi Trust 10 crore. So this itself comes to around 100 crore. Apart from that, temples offered food, shelter, and so many things. But all those things are never documented and talked. Everybody will come. So, like from the time invaders have been looting money, and that's what the thought some have, our people have inherited as invaders' mindset. The moment something comes, and they won't ask that why other places can't be giving money. And the second part that came to mind is that what gave confidence to people during Corona to walk down all the way to their hometowns. It's not easy. People walk from Bombay, people walk down from Delhi, people walk down from Bangalore, from Calcutta to different places all over India. So where do you get that confidence that you can walk that 100 kilometer or 1,000 kilometer, and you can walk down along with your family, along with your luggage? So that is where it comes, is that if you look, whether it is Wari in Maharashtra, or Sabrimala, or Kanwad Yatra, or when you go to Vaishno Devi, or when you go to Amarnath Yatra, you walk long distance. You not only walk, you carry a lot of weight on yourself, and you walk. So that is where the confidence comes from. The people have been walking for Tirth Yatra, or to offer pilgrimage, and they know that they can walk down all that distance, and they can walk down. They have confidence in their own country, their own people. They know that there will be somebody who offered food. So all the along when they walked, there were different temples and there were religious trust which offered food to them. So I realized that how important the temple have been impacting our economy. Our temples have given money during war, during flood, when CRPF soldiers were blown in Pulwama, in Uri. It's the temples which came along with others, apart from government, to give that money. So our temple have been doing human service to our people. It's just that we have not been acknowledging it. We've been rather selfishly being rude to our temples, and we don't appreciate it. So that's why I thought I'll document a book on that. So this much is on temple economics. If you have any questions, you can put in chat or whichever way. And now I'll cover the other part of funding on publishing. Now, as I said, I've written 11. I'm writing my 11th book. So some of the book I publish using crowdfunding model, which is very interesting. And this is my fourth book, which I'll be using, publishing by public fund crowdfunding. So what I am asking people in this case is to contribute 1,000 rupees. For every 1,000 rupees when that person contributes, his name will be acknowledged in the book, and he will get at least 2 hard copies of the book. So idea is that attempt is to give more number of copies of the book, but that final call is taken when the book is about to be printed, because the size of the book, the courier cost, all that will have to factor in. And what I'm trying to do this time is that I'm asking people to have one contributor from every district of India. So the idea is that the book on temple economics should reach every part of India, and people should be aware of in every part of India that how important role a temple plays a part in it. And so far I have covered 118 districts in India. In Gujarat there are 33 districts. I have managed to cover 7 so far. And if anybody is interested, they can write to me, they can connect with me at my email ID, which I'm typing here in the chat box, templeeconomics at gmail.com. So if anybody is interested, they can join. And as I said, this is a very interesting model, and I've covered 118 districts so far. So friend, I'll stop here with this, and I look forward to questions if any of you have on this temple economics or a crowdfunding model. Over to you, Daisy ma'am.
Yes. Thank you, sir. I think questions are now coming in. Students are raising their hands. So I would request Aman Tiwari to ask this question. Students, you may also write the question on chat box in case you are facing any problem. I'll be asking that question. Otherwise, just raise your hand. Aman, you may ask the question.
Ma'am, it is by mistake, ma'am.
Okay, Shubham, is that too? Shubham?
Yes, ma'am. Can I?
Question? Yes, please.
I just wanted to ask that in past we can say that everything in India was centered by religion and Hinduism, and that's why we were the superpower and we were so much away and we were so much developed than other countries. but at present that is not there, and that all you are trying to influence. And sir, what is the solution now? How can we be a super power and we can जैसे कैसे उसको सेंटर में ला सकते हैं? और जैसे आज की सिचुएशन ये है कि हर चीज में मतलब बहुत कंफ्यूजन है, कोई इधर से मतलब हिंदुइज्म पे मतलब रिलीजन पे इधर से हो रहा है वार, उधर से हो रहा है, मतलब बहुत कंफ्यूजन है इंडिया में। और
हाँ
फिर इन सब में सॉल्यूशन क्या है?
हाँ, सो नाइस क्वेश्चन। इसमें दो तीन चीजें हैं। देखिए, हम ऐसा मानते हैं कि हमें सुपर पावर नहीं बनना है, इन द सेंस कि हमने कभी दूसरे कंट्रीज पे अटैक इन द सेंस नहीं किया, दो वी हैड इम्पैक्टेड ह्यूज इन्फ्लुएंस ऑन मेनी कंट्रीज, स्पेशली अगर हम फार ईस्ट में जाएंगे अप टू कंबोडिया तक, बट वहां लड़ाइयां नहीं लड़के हम अपने कल्चरल चीजों से लोगों को इम्पैक्ट किए थे। तो हमारा अभी भी थॉट प्रोसेस भारत का ये है कि हम सुपर पावर होने का मतलब हम इतने पावरफुल हों कि पहले की तरह हम पे कोई अटैक करके कभी भी चढ़ाई करे और जीत जाए या हमें मार पाए, ये नहीं कर पाए। और इसके साथ ही हम अपने विचारों से दूसरों को इन्फ्लुएंस कर पाए। तो अगर आप देखेंगे तो प्रधानमंत्री जी उसको विश्व गुरु के नाम से बोलते हैं, तो उसके लिए स्ट्रेंथ भी बहुत जरूरी है। और इफ यू रियलाइज दैट कि हमारे सारे टेम्पल में अखाड़े हुआ करते थे, तो पढ़ाई के साथ साथ मजबूत होना भी जरूरी है, जो हम कहीं भूल गए। तो उस चीज को करेक्ट करना होगा। और अगर आप स्ट्रेंथ स्ट्रांग होंगे तभी अच्छे होंगे। और जहां तक बहुत सारी चीजों का सवाल है, लोग बोलते रहेंगे, हम में अपनी क्लैरिटी होनी चाहिए कि हमारा जो है कि वसुधैव कुटुंबकम, जो जहां है वो अच्छा है और हम अच्छे हैं, हम किसी से खराब या कम नहीं है। क्योंकि हम ओवर ए पीरियड हमको वो इंफीरियरिटी कॉम्प्लेक्स में ला दिया गया था कि आपका हर चीज खराब है। हमारे सिलेबस वैसे ही है कि हम हमेशा हारते रहे, जो कि सच्चाई नहीं है। हमें जहां फार ईस्ट में हमने शासन किया या इन्फ्लुएंस रहा अप टू कंबोडिया तक, वो हमारे चोला पीरियड डायनेस्टी की बात ही कभी नहीं इतिहास में की गई, या मगध साम्राज्य की बहुत कभी बात नहीं हुई, या अहम साम्राज्य की बात नहीं हुई। तो वो हमें पढ़ाया गया इसलिए कि हम इंफीरियरिटी कॉम्प्लेक्स में जीते रहे। अब कम से कम इंटरनेट है, किताबें हैं, चीजें अवेलेबल हैं, तो हमें अवेयर होना चाहिए और हमें झुकना नहीं चाहिए। हम जहां सही हैं उस बात पे हमें खड़ा होना चाहिए। हमें किसी को दूसरे को नीचा दिखाने की जरूरत नहीं है और ना नीचा समझने की जरूरत है। ये जो हम नीचे समझने वाली स्थिति में आ गए थे, वहां से हमारा डाउनफॉल शुरू हुआ। अगर हम इन चीजों को करेक्ट कर लें तो हम अपना खोया हुआ स्थान वापस प्राप्त कर लेंगे।
बट सर उसके लिए जो सिटीजन है उनको अवेयर होना पड़ेगा कि हाँ हमारा रिलीजन इतना पावरफुल है, हम इतने पावरफुल है कि हम कर सकते हैं। पर
Correct.
सर वही चीज है ना कि इतना मतलब इतनी कंफ्यूजन
मैंने अभी तक मैंने जितनी चीजें बताई आपको पता थी सब?
सर हाँ, मुझे कुछ ना कुछ आइडिया था, मतलब मैं इन सब पे रिसर्च करता रहता हूँ।
करेक्ट। तो बाकी जिन लोगों को नहीं पता होगा उनको इससे पता चला, तो चीजें इसी से ऐसे ही आगे बढ़ती हैं और इसीलिए पुस्तक लिख रहे हैं और इसीलिए बात कर।
आपको नहीं लगता सर सोशल मीडिया, यूट्यूब भी एक बहुत अच्छा प्लेटफॉर्म हो सकता है इन सब चीजों को के लिए?
लोग यूज कर रहे हैं ना, काफी सारी चीजें अवेलेबल हैं यूट्यूब पे, आप जाइए तो, और लोग कर भी रहे हैं और लोगों को करना भी चाहिए, और ज्यादा लोगों को।
थैंक यू।
थैंक यू।
Yes. Any more questions, please?
So in that case, can I ask one question, ma'am?
Yes, yes, sir, please.
So Sandeep ji, namaste. Thank
namaste.
you for this very interesting and wonderful lecture.
Thank you. Thank you.
You know, you have collected so much data, and it's interesting to know that, you know, Kumbh Mela generates so much revenue. I was not at all aware of that, though I spent almost 1 month in Kumbh Mela.
And you made such a beautiful movie.
Yeah, thank you for that. So, you know, my question right now is that, of course, the title of your talk is Temple Economics. Okay? So are you going to cover temple management also? Because temple is a huge structure. You know, lakhs of devotees come, and you know, it requires a lot of management principle to smoothly and, you know, efficiently run this temple as a big institution. Okay.
Correct.
We always criticize them as a big institution, huge institutions, you know, gobbling up money and all that. But we never look at them from management perspective, that because people are there from voluntarily perspective, professional perspective, and they are giving their services. So if you look at the functioning of temple, it's again one of the amazing area where we can learn a lot. So are you going to cover something in your book related to that?
Yes, very much. Without that, I can't, write on the economics part of it, that how it is managed.
Yes.
So, and as you rightly pointed out, one will be surprised and shocked the kind of management we have. And I'll tell you something very interesting, that we have management system in place in temples which are done in the 8th century. Today we are in 2020, So you can imagine the 1600 years back, the way management was designed to run those temples, they are still perfect. And will be surprised that British tried to evolve it. They got people to, how they can improve the management. And then finally they realized the way it was being managed earlier was the best. They can't add anything more to it. Now even after independence, a lot of people applied their brain. Actually, if government moves out of the managing temple, the temple will be managed much better and they will be far more productive. And I've got documentary evidence and data along with which I'm writing in the book. So I'll indeed cover that. And I'll take this opportunity to mention one more thing. I generally said that, Indian stretchable time, we are not on time. It's just that anybody who gets educated is not bothered about the time. In the Western model, I believe. Because if you look, people who follow the traditional Bharatiya model of education, they are perfect on their time always. मंदिर में पूजा हजारों साल से उसी समय को होती है. गंगा आरती हो, हरिद्वार की आरती हो, आंधी तूफान आए, जो भी आए, वो शाम को 6 बजे और सुबह 6 बजे होनी है. चाहे जितना ठंड हो तो उतने ही बजे होती है, और वो हजारों साल से चल रही है, और हर मंदिर में वो होता है. तो हमारे यहाँ और जो कुंभ होता है, तो उसके लिए कोई अनाउंसमेंट नहीं होता है. हर गांव से पंचांग बनती है अपने हर क्षेत्र की, और उसमें वही एग्जैक्ट कैलकुलेशन होता है. बड़ा इंटरेस्टिंग है कि जब तक हब्बल टेलीस्कोप नहीं आया था, तब तक लोगों को दैट इज इन अर्ली 20th सेंचुरी, तब तक चंद्र ग्रहण, सूर्य ग्रहण कैसे होगा नहीं पता था, एक्सेप्ट कि हमारे पंचांग में एग्जैक्ट डेट बता दिया जाता था. और डेट नहीं, हम सेकंड का भी बाइफर्केशन करके पल और क्षण पे जाते हैं, और आज तक हम उसका वैल्यू नहीं समझ पाए, इसलिए हम पंचांग की वैल्यू नहीं कर पा रहे हैं. तो हमारे यहाँ, एज आई मेंशन अर्लियर, की टेम्पल में साइंस था, टेक्नोलॉजी थी, एस्ट्रोनॉमी थी, क्योंकि मैथ्स नहीं होता तो ज्योमेट्री नहीं होती, ट्रिग्नोमेट्री नहीं होती, और ज्योमेट्री ट्रिग्नोमेट्री नहीं होती तो मंदिर के अलावा एस्ट्रोनॉमी भी नहीं हो पाती, और एस्ट्रोनॉमी नहीं हो पाती तो पंचांग नहीं बनता, और वो नहीं होता तो हमारे सारे फेस्टिवल के डेट फिक्स नहीं हो पाते, जो आज भी परफेक्ट है.
Right. Very much interesting. And there's one more question that I would like to ask.
Yes, go ahead. Feel close.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am.